Hi, so it's my pleasure to introduce Andreas. He probably... All right. He probably needs no introduction, but I will introduce nonetheless. Andreas is probably the greatest speaker in the Bitcoin or blockchain world, or at least one of them. And he can talk at the very highest levels about the value of Bitcoin and blockchain technology, but he also can dive down super deep, all the way down to the lowest levels, the nitty-gritty, and not only talk about it, but explain it extremely well in the books that he's written, in the talks that he's given, and so on. So I guess without further ado, Andreas Antonopoulos, take it away.
Well, I can't hear anyone, so I don't know if you can hear me. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. So, yay, okay, fantastic, great. What I'd like to talk about today is mining, and we'll call this talk Mining Demystified. The main idea here is to talk about mining, which is probably one of the most obscure aspects of Bitcoin, one of the things in Bitcoin that is the least well understood. And so if you look at Bitcoin, what is the magic technology behind Bitcoin? Which is the technology that actually gives us the features that we care about in Bitcoin, that gives us decentralization and borderless access and the ability to innovate without permission. And so the answer to that, as we've heard all throughout 2015, is that the magic technology behind Bitcoin is blockchain. Well, I'm sorry, but that's wrong. Blockchain isn't a magic technology. In fact, blockchain on its own is not a particularly interesting technology. The really interesting technology behind Bitcoin and what gives it all of its really magical properties is the consensus mechanism of proof of work, mining, which creates the blockchain. The blockchain is really just an artifact of the consensus mechanism. It's what you produce through consensus. And looking at the product rather than the process is a classic misunderstanding in engineering. The product, the blockchain, is not that interesting. The way you produce it, which is decentralized consensus through proof of work, is in fact the interesting part of Bitcoin. And it's interesting because by producing this decentralized artifact, the blockchain, through a decentralized consensus process called proof of work, we are able to create certain capabilities and features. Bitcoin is immutable because of proof of work. Bitcoin is unforgeable because of proof of work. Bitcoin is decentralized because of proof of work. Bitcoin is open and borderless because of proof of work, not because of the blockchain. Proof of work, or mining, as we have so mischaracterized it, it's a terrible word because it brings to mind men covered in coal with pickaxes, and that's hardly a good image for the most technologically advanced form of money we've ever built, but hey, let's go with that. Mining is the thing that provides Bitcoin's capabilities. So when you hear the conversation today, it seems like mining is kind of the nasty, pointless side effect of Bitcoin. It's the thing we really don't want. It's like, could we really do this without mining? We wouldn't use so much electricity. There wouldn't be all of these people in China. They look for it, and who knows what their government wants to do. And nobody really understands how it works anyway. So can we just get rid of that and instead just build blockchains without mining? And in fact, that's exactly what a lot of the banking consortia are trying to do. But of course, they're missing the point, because without mining, you don't get these features. You don't get immutability. Let's look at a specific scenario to understand this a bit better. Many people who misunderstand mining say that it's not decentralized or it's not as immutable because if you get 51%, you can modify the blockchain. But that's not exactly true, because even if you have 51% of the hashing power, or even 99 or 100% of the hashing power, you still can't produce blocks without proof of work. You still have to produce proof of work. That's part of the consensus validation rules, and none of the other nodes in the network will accept your blocks, even if you have 100% of the mining, without you producing proof of work. And that proof of work costs time and electricity, which means that if you want to fabricate or forge blocks or rewrite the past, rewrite history, change something that is immutable into something that is mutable, you have to produce proof of work in order to do that. Even if you have 100% of the hashing power, you still have to produce proof of work. And what that means is if you're competing with everybody else on the blockchain, let's say you have only 90%, so 9/10 of the total hashing power, you're competing against the other 10%. That means that in the time that it takes the other 10% to produce a block, at best you can produce 9 blocks, which means that you can really only modify the history back about 9 or 10 blocks into the past, which is an hour and a half. So you can only affect past history for an hour and a half if you put all of your effort simply into modifying the past rather than censoring the future. So the Bitcoin blockchain through proof of work is very, very strongly immutable. It is practically impossible to modify more than a few hours of proof of work once it's been laid down. And it is inconceivable to go back and modify 144 blocks, which is 1 day of the blockchain. That is strong immutability. And it has nothing to do with who controls the hashing power or how much hashing power they control. Even with control over 90% of the hashing power, or even 100%, you still have to produce proof of work. The other big misunderstanding about mining is the idea that the purpose of mining is to create new coins. And again, that is a massive misunderstanding of the point. Creating new coins is a side effect of mining. It's a convenient way to control the issuance of new coins, and it is an important part of the game theory and reward system that keeps miners honest. But creating new coins is not the point of mining. The point of mining, the purpose of mining, is to provide security for Bitcoin, to provide the immutability and validation of the consensus rules. And what that means is that the miner's primary job is to validate transactions, validate blocks, and only mine blocks with correctly validated transactions in them based on the latest consensus rules. If they do that, then they get rewarded with new coins, but the new coins are not really the point. It's actually difficult to understand all of the complex interplay of motivations and interests that are involved in mining, because we don't really know how these play out in the long term. And so there's a lot of speculation and prediction about potential outcomes in different scenarios where conditions change. One very important event that's coming up soon is the halving. And the halving happens on approximately the 22nd of July, 2016. And this is a time when the reward for each block will be reduced by 50%. And instead of 25 Bitcoin, it will be 12.5 Bitcoin for the next 4 years, approximately 4 years. The halving is, of course, not a surprise. You can anticipate every halving that's going to happen until the last halving in 2141 with quite a bit of accuracy. There's a small statistical error in the calculation of block timing and difficulty that means we're going at about 0.5% faster on the network than we should be going, but nevertheless, it is a highly predictable and deterministic future for Bitcoin. And the happening, like perhaps some of you who are old enough to remember, the Y2K event has created these wild tales of impending doom. All machines on the planet will fail, is what they told us in Y2K. And Bitcoin will enter a death spiral, is what they tell us about Bitcoin's Y2K moment, the halvening of July 22nd. Of course, when Y2K actually happened, nothing really happened. Part of that was because of a lot of preparation, and part of that because the problem was exaggerated. The Bitcoin halving is going to be very similar. There's a lot of preparation. Everybody knows when it's going to happen. And the entire mining community have to take it into consideration in their long-term investment plans as to how the halving is going to affect their profitability. At the same time, everybody's preparing for it and anticipating it and working to make sure there are no problems. So in the end, I think what's going to happen during the halving is nothing. The block reward is going to be reduced by half. Bitcoin will not enter a death spiral, although the quality of journalism around Bitcoin will continue its quite extravagant death spiral and continue producing more and more ridiculous articles about Bitcoin's impending doom. And perhaps we will reach peak Bitcoin obituaries. Please check them out at bitcoinobituaries.com. Now, during the halving, we're going to see a lot of price volatility. And this is predictable because a lot of the people who are speculating about Bitcoin going down and Bitcoin going up will see in the slightest change in the price impending trends, and then will buy or sell according to this speculation and cause the exact impending trends that they imagine. Until those are not sustainable, they reverse, and you have the opposite direction, which will cause a kind of up and down, up and down, up and down roller coaster ride for maybe a few days, a few weeks. But in the end, none of this has anything to do with the technical fundamentals. In the end, mining remains both Bitcoin's most robust capability and the source frame for which all of its most important features and benefits derive. It's the forgotten part of Bitcoin that blockchains are leaving behind because they think it's inefficient, missing the point of why we do mining and why we buy freedom for the cost of inefficiency. And after the halving, we'll go back to having discussions about how mining is not efficient and not environmentally friendly, and how it would be much better if we did Bitcoin without mining. But in the end, mining is one of the main and most important parts of this incredible invention that is Bitcoin. Thank you so much for listening. So I can't hear anything. I hope maybe we can hear. If you turn off your...
This is a problem. Yes, Richard.
I was wondering if you could lead some questions.
Could you turn off the sound for a moment upstairs?
Maybe just switch around, switch mics, and then walkie-talkie.
If you could turn off the sound for a moment, then I can tell Andreas that he should turn off his... Okay, Andreas, we can take some questions this way, but if we actually play them back, we'll of course pick them up with my phone again, and it will lead to that dramatic effect. So does anyone have questions? Before we have...
You can ask.
Okay.
You'll ask the questions.
Does anyone have questions? Does anyone have something they'd like Andreas to talk to us about?
Well, I do have one little question.
All right. Let me
It's
get...
pretty quick. It's pretty simple to make ease of translation.
What does Andreas think of alternative methods of reaching consensus? And I'm obviously thinking here about proof of stake systems, whether we're talking about Namecoin next and possibly Ethereum's proposed move to proof of stake.
Yeah, switch.
Okay. So,
All right. Can you hear me now? Yes. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. All right, great. So yes, thank you for that question. So the question, if you didn't hear it, was what do I think about alternative forms of consensus such as proof of stake? I'm very interested in proof of stake, as well as all other innovations in the area of consensus. We've got to realize that effectively consensus algorithms were invented in 2009. And they are now a very vibrant and exciting area of research in computer science and distributed systems. And we're going to see a lot of developments in this space around consensus algorithms. For the time being, none of the consensus algorithms are as well tested at scale as Bitcoin's. And I think we have seen repeatedly that building alternative consensus algorithms is difficult. So I'm excited to see if we can, in fact, build alternative consensus algorithms. Proof of stake has its own unique challenges, which are different from the challenges of proof of work. But I think proof of stake can, under certain circumstances, provide many of the same benefits that proof of work does, such as immutability, unforgeability, decentralization of validation, open access, and open innovation. And of course, censorship resistance. That, of course, remains to be seen. We'll have to see how these things work in practice. Interestingly enough, I think one of the things that most people have not yet noticed is that there is a possibility, a strong possibility, that Lightning Network will effectively be Bitcoin's first proof of stake system. Lightning Network, the way I understand it and from what I see in the development, will offer the possibility for hubs and payment channels, endpoints, to use Bitcoin locked into payment channels in order to deliver a very high transaction throughput rate. And if that's combined with small fees on the opening and closing of the payment channels, that essentially allows a participant in Lightning to stake Bitcoin into a payment channel that makes the payment channel capable of doing a lot of transactions and in return receive fees. And if you read that the way I read it, that's a proof of stake system, which ironically means that without anybody noticing, by the end of 2016, Bitcoin may in fact become a hybrid proof of work, proof of stake system with the incorporation of the Lightning Network. So, this is a very rapidly moving space, and I think we're going to see a lot more development, and I'm certainly interested in alternative consensus mechanisms. Although, in order for consensus mechanisms to be interesting and to deliver the features that I care about for Bitcoin, they have to be massively decentralized and pseudonymous or anonymous, meaning that it should not be possible to easily identify, restrict the participation in, or coerce the participants into changing the consensus rules. And while proof of work does that, and proof of stake arguably can do that as well, some of the other schemes that are being suggested, such as the idea of participants in a closed blockchain taking turns signing transactions, these are often the schemes discussed in private ledgers. These do not deliver the same results as proof of work or proof of stake. They do not offer immutability or strong immutability. If signatures are all that's needed to validate a block, then the participants in such a scheme can go back and rewrite history for a whole year, let alone a day. Something that is practically infeasible with Bitcoin could easily be done on a private ledger. And so that's a big concern for me, that we are seeing that in the marketplace there's a lot of noise and very little understanding of how the fundamental capabilities of Bitcoin arise out of its proof of work algorithm. We'll see a lot of consensus suggestions, and quite honestly, a lot of them are not going to work, and a lot of them are bullshit that will make a lot of consultants rich, selling bullshit to banks. But that's okay. It certainly funds further research in the blockchain space, and I'm happy with that either way. In the end, what matters is practical results, and we do know there is one consensus algorithm that works, and works well at pretty high scale, and that's proof of work, the gift of Satoshi Nakamoto.
Okay, so Richard has a question. You can see yourself.
Hi, Andreas. I think it won't be any surprise to hear this question, and you've been asked it many times, and probably will be asked the same question quite a few times again in the coming weeks and months. Ethereum is getting a lot of attention recently. What do you have to say about that? Is the dominance of Bitcoin, is that being threatened by this upstart Ethereum, and what will be the role and the relationship between the two?
Hey, so please give us a moment to switch. Actually, had the same question. Yeah. Okay.
Are we ready? Yeah. All right. So I'm a big fan of Ethereum. I'm interested in Ethereum. I've participated in Ethereum from the very beginning, and I use Ethereum quite extensively for experimental purposes at the moment. I think it's important to understand that Ethereum is not intended to do many of the same things that Bitcoin does. Its primary focus is on being a stateful blockchain that carries contracts. And in doing so, Ethereum makes some design compromises and trade-offs that are different from the design trade-offs that Bitcoin makes. Where Bitcoin uses a limited and simple scripting language that is Turing incomplete in order to provide very robust security. And simplicity is security. Ethereum aims to have a Turing complete smart contracts language that is much more flexible for executing smart contracts. Where Bitcoin has some scaling issues by attempting to solve these decentralization problem through the global distribution of a single blockchain artifact. Ethereum has that problem, only it's an order of magnitude worse, because the amount of data that is being stored is far greater. And arguably, solutions that are being suggested, such as sharding, have yet to be proven. If they're so good, maybe we can use them in Bitcoin too. We'll see. I think the two systems will copy each other and gain ideas from each other. But ultimately, I don't think they are competing. I take a perspective of the ecosystem of coins that is that of an ecosystem. And in an ecosystem, there are environmental niches. And different species in that ecosystem will try to specialize into different environmental niches. This is not a direct face-to-face competition between these two systems. And part of the reason for that is because they're making different choices to specialize into different niches. The fundamental truth of evolutionary systems is when you evolve to specialize in one ecosystem, by definition, you are less specialized for all of the other ecosystems. And so I see, as a comparison, I would say Bitcoin and Ethereum are a bit like a shark and a lion. And the lion can be king of the plains, and the shark can be king of the oceans. And they're all really good at what they're doing. But to say they're competing, I think, misses the point, because the choices that the shark made to survive in its environment make it very unsuited to run around the plains chasing lions. And the choices the lions made to suit in their environment make them very poor competitors once they're submerged in the ocean. They can each be apex species within their own environmental niche, and there's very little overlap. I think in the end, Ethereum is best at smart contracts, and Bitcoin is best at creating robust, simple, and very effective scalable security as a reserve currency and a very strong immutable ledger. Those two things are not easy to create in one solution. They are almost diametrically opposed in their design considerations. I also think a lot of this is about misunderstanding how scaling works. People who are worried about Bitcoin scaling and then see Ethereum as a darling probably don't understand that Ethereum scaling problems, though different from Bitcoin, are just as big and perhaps even bigger. The same thing can be said for Dash and many other coins and chains that are getting a lot of attention. It's very popular to say that Bitcoin is dead and to look for the next success. We've seen this again and again. If you've been in Bitcoin for 5 years, you have probably had this discussion again and again and again. I was asked if Litecoin was going to vanquish Bitcoin with its very fast confirmation times and ability to process more transactions. Funnily enough, I was even asked if Dogecoin would beat Bitcoin at its own game by having a better community. The bottom line is that the choices that Bitcoin has made make it very suitable for what it is. And it's not really facing competition from other systems, either because they can't differentiate enough to provide significant value increase and beat the network effect or early mover advantage that Bitcoin has, or because they differentiate enough, and that makes them not a direct competitor of Bitcoin, as is the case with Ethereum. I think that Bitcoin and Ethereum and Dash and dozens of other currencies and chains that are more specialized and fit various niches are all increasing the value of the cryptocurrency space in general. One of the interesting things that has happened is that when people are now disappointed in Bitcoin, they don't leave cryptocurrencies. They just go to a different cryptocurrency and attract even more people into the cryptocurrency space. And I can only see that as a success for everyone in this space. It's going to be a very big space with a lot of different applications, and there is not going to be one universal system that solves all problems. We're going to see a broad ecosystem with many different solutions that will interact well. And I think Bitcoin will find its niche, and its primary niche as a reserve currency seems to be one of its strongest points. The system that underlies and brings security to, as well as creates a means of exchange for other digital currencies. And I think that's a very strong position for Bitcoin to be in. I think Ethereum is doing some amazing things with smart contracts, and the two work best when you work with them together, as is the case with most other cryptocurrencies and chains. The ones that are really interesting work best with Bitcoin, not instead of Bitcoin. So I'm really excited to see all of this creativity now finding more sustainable and valuable outlets than just Bitcoin. We are now an ecosystem, not just a single currency, and that is very good news.
Okay, so if we could switch one last time.
Question.
Okay. Yeah. I don't want to have that noise again. Can we, are we good? Yeah, okay. In that case, we're going to wrap up. Thank you very much for your time. Everyone, please give him a round of applause.